that wasn't supposed to open. It wasn't supposed to open. That was a rule. Fire doors in Tower 2 remained sealed once the alarm was triggered. Automatic lock. No override. No second chances. But that morning, someone changed the rule. Raymond Alvarez didn't have a badge. Not the kind that opened doors. Anyway, he wasn't part of the executive floors. He wasn't listed on any evacuation priority plan. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't sit behind a desk. He pushed a cart. That's all. He pushed a cart full of mops, sprays, and used paper towels down the 34th floor of the South Tower. At exactly 8:13 a.m., it was supposed to be a routine shift. Clean the restrooms, check the stairwells, replace the air freshener. No one was meant to remember him, not even see him. But that day, hundreds would look straight into his eyes and never forget. Raymond always started with the North Corridor. He liked the light there, the way it bounced off the windows. He said it made the floor feel less like a glass coffin. He was halfway through cleaning the hallway when the first noise hit. He didn't see anything, not at first, but the entire window frame shook, like someone had slapped the building from above. He stood still, mop still in hand, listening, and then phones started ringing. 1, 3, 7 at once. Then people came out. It wasn't panic yet, not exactly, just confusion. Then someone ran into the corridor, screaming. They hit the other tower. Raymond turned. What do you mean the other tower? But the man didn't answer. He was already running. Raymond's training, what little of it he'd been given, said this. In case of evacuation, prop open the stairwell door, but only if the lock fails. Otherwise, let it close. Security would handle it. But the lock hadn't failed. The door to stairwell B was already locked. No way to open from the inside. Just one small latch, deep in the frame, that was meant to catch automatically. Only Raymond knew that latch had been catching wrong for months. Maintenance hadn't come yet. He had submitted a note. No one read it. So every morning, he brought a rubber wedge and slid it under frame to keep the door open just wide enough, just in case. He used to say, no one ever asked, in case of what? At 8:46 a.m., the first plane hit Tower 1. People screamed, not just on the floor, across the building. Raymond looked out a narrow glass slit. Smoke poured from the North Tower. Flames, papers raining like snow. That's when people really started running. Dozens poured from offices. Many ran straight past the stairwell. They were looking for elevators. He shouted, no elevators, take the stairs. This way. No one listened. So he did something strange. He let go of his cart, stepped in front of the stairwell door, and held it open with his hand. One by one, people came, a woman with trembling hands, a young man trying to call his dad, an older man limping. Raymond didn't ask questions. He didn't move. He just said, this way, and he held the door. By 9 a.m., there was smoke in the hallway, somewhere on 80-something. Rumors said the second plane had hit. Tower 2 now, his tower. Some people cried. Some froze. But the flow kept coming. Dozens, then hundreds. And Raymond stood there, hand on the metal door, shoulder braced, sweat on his brow, never speaking more than 2 words. Keep going. He could have left. At any time. No one would have blamed him. No one even knew his name. But he didn't, because he was afraid the door might close, and that once it did, no one else would get out. That door wasn't supposed to open, but it did, because one man refused to let it close. The smoke didn't blink. Statue of Liberty South Tower, between 9:03 a.m. and 9:19 a.m. Smoke doesn't blink. It doesn't wait. It doesn't ask. It enters, and it takes. At 9:03 a.m., the second plane struck the South Tower. Raymond didn't see it. He felt it, a roar, not like thunder, like a train in the bones. The building shifted. The door in his hand jolted against him, but he didn't let go. Dust rained from the ceiling tiles. A pipe burst somewhere down the hall. A second of silence. Then screaming. Everywhere. More people came. Now bleeding. Now coughing. A woman with ash in her hair. One shoe missing. A man with a bloody tie. And a broken wristwatch. Muttering someone's name over and over. Raymond stood in the doorway. The rubber wedge gone. Blown out in the impact. Now it was just his hand. His arm. His back pressed into the frame. He could feel the steel of the door, pulsing against him, like the tower was breathing, like it was hurting. One man stopped in front of him. "You coming?" Raymond looked at him, then at the stairwell behind him, then at the line still forming down the corridor. "No," he said, "not yet." The smoke came slower than fire. It wasn't in a rush, but it didn't stop. It curled along the ceiling, slid down the corners, crawled toward the carpet like a tide. Raymond watched it with narrowed eyes. It reminded him of a moment in his childhood, his house in the Bronx, when the heater failed, and his uncle burned old newspapers in a trash can. That smoke, back then, smelled like cardboard and oil. This one smelled like glass and burning wire and something human. People still came, now crying, now praying. A young woman clutched a framed photo of a dog. A man in a dress shirt kept yelling, "We just got married, she's up there, floor 78. But Raymond couldn't leave, not while the corridor had sound, not while feet kept coming. His arm ached, his palm was raw, but he'd press harder. He started counting, not people, breaths, his own, just to stay calm. 1 inhale, 2, hold, out. 1 inhale, 2, hold, out. Again. It didn't help, but it was something to do. Besides, feel. The fire alarms had stopped. The building didn't scream anymore. It hissed, like a dying engine, like something trying not to collapse. Out loud. At 9:14 a.m., Raymond heard glass shatter. A floor above, then another. Shouts from behind. Footsteps in front. A man in a Port Authority jacket tripped in front of him. Raymond helped him up with his free hand. "You holding the door?" the man asked, eyes wide with disbelief. Raymond nodded. "But why?" he said. Raymond didn't answer. He just looked at the man, his skin now gray with ash, his eyes glistening with guilt. "Because someone has to," he finally whispered. The man left. Another came, then another. By 9:18 a.m., Raymond's legs shook. His back slid down the frame an inch. He gritted his teeth. He thought of his mother. She had always said, "If you're going to be somewhere no one looks, make sure you still see everything." He smiled just for a second, and he kept seeing. The corridor behind him was no longer a hallway. It was a blur of smoke, shadows, and the sound of shoes hitting tile. The door in his hand burned warm now, but he didn't flinch. He just stared into the smoke. It didn't blink, so neither did he. The last faces. South Tower, 9:19 a.m. to 9:36 a.m. They didn't always speak. Most of them didn't even look back, but some looked right into his eyes. And in that second, they left something behind. Not words, not names, not thank you, just a glance. And Raymond remembered every single one. By 9:19 a.m., the corridor was half dark. Smoke clung to the air like breath on cold glass. Emergency lights flickered, red and amber. Fire alarms stuttered, not screaming anymore, but choking, like they had been screaming too long. The building groaned, like a living thing, being pulled apart. Raymond's hand had gone numb, not from heat, from stillness. He hadn't moved in 45 minutes. His shoulder was locked. His eyes burned from the smoke, but they stayed open because they were all he had left to give. His strength was gone, but his gaze still worked, so he used it. A man in a gray suit stumbled out, coughing blood into a napkin. He didn't see Raymond at first, but as he passed, he turned And in a glance that lasted only a second, Raymond saw everything: fear, gratitude, embarrassment, like the man couldn't believe he needed to be saved by someone he never once noticed. Next came a woman in her early 60s. She was barefoot, eyes swollen from smoke. In her arms, a stack of client folders pressed her chest like a baby. She looked straight at Raymond and said, in a shaking voice, "Are you an angel?" He shook his head. "No," he whispered, and then smiled, the kind that says, "But it's okay if you think so." The crowd slowed, not because people weren't coming, but because fewer were left to come. The offices above the impact floors were burning. No one came from there, just the ones who had been below, just the ones who had time. 9:27 a.m. The fire reached a lower level. The hallway changed. The air became tight, like breathing through plastic. Every inhale felt like swallowing heat. Raymond coughed. His knees trembled, but he didn't let go. His back was now slick with sweat. His fingers blistered, but his eyes kept watching. A woman with red hair and no shoes passed by. She stopped, looked at him. "I used to hate this job," she said. Raymond blinked. "Today, I think it saved me." Then she was gone. A man in a maintenance uniform, maybe from electrical, paused. "You the guy holding the door?" Raymond nodded. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver coin, pressed it into Raymond's palm. "For luck," he said. Raymond had no strength to reply. He just closed his fingers around the coin and held it there, like a relic. By 9:32, the hallway went silent. Not dead, just slowed, like time had sunk into water. The smoke grew thicker, the lights dimmer. And then, footsteps. One more. A young woman, maybe 25, wearing a company badge and a pink hoodie, mascara down her cheeks. She stopped in front of Raymond, didn't speak, but she looked long, deep. Raymond couldn't breathe well, but he still managed to smile. Her bottom lip trembled. Then she reached forward and placed her hand, gently, on the side of his face. "Thank you," she said, and she left. Raymond stood there, alone again, the smoke curling around him, like a slow river of forgetting. He looked back into the building. The hallway was empty, but the faces, they were still there, not on the carpet, not in the air. Inside him, some had cried, some had prayed, some had whispered names of people who wouldn't get out, but all of them had passed through a door held open by a man who never asked for anything in return. And now he waited. For what? He didn't know. He didn't know if anyone else would come. He just knew he couldn't let go. Not yet. The door will close. South Tower, 9:36 a.m. to 9:52 a.m. Every door eventually closes. That's what they all said. Buildings fall. Systems fail. Locks catch. Time shuts everything. And no one holds anything forever. But Raymond Alvarez was still trying. 9:36 a.m. His back was pressed so hard against the frame that his spine began to throb in rhythm with the fire alarms. His fingers were no longer hands. They were lock tools of bone and blister. His lungs whistled with every breath, drawing in more heat than air. The corridor was silent now. The rush was over. He was alone again, but the door was still open, and so he stayed. The smoke was thicker. It didn't just sting now. It wrapped around his arms like a weight, a pressure, a whisper. No one else is coming. He heard it, not from a voice, but from the walls, from the stillness. Raymond closed his eyes. In that dark silence behind his eyelids, he saw his father's workshop, a small garage in Brooklyn, with chips on the floor, a broken radio half fixed on the bench. He remembered how his father used to say, "If something breaks, and you're the one there to fix it, then you don't walk away, not until someone else arrives." But no one else was arriving. The tower groaned again, not like steel bending, like something tired, something saying goodbye. The door in his hand shook. The heat made the frame swell. He could feel it resisting him now, not closing, but wanting to, like the building itself was ready to let go. But Raymond wasn't. Not yet. 9:41 a.m. A sudden noise. Not loud, not sharp, just a breath, a cough from deep inside the corridor. He turned his head, eyes blurry, throat raw. He squinted, and there, a shape, a figure, crawling, one arm, one elbow, a slow drag forward. It was a man, covered in soot, face blackened, mouth open, gasping. Raymond didn't speak, didn't shout. He just lowered himself as far as his legs would let him and reached out a trembling arm. The man reached back. Their fingers met, like survivors on opposite sides of an ocean. Raymond pulled. He didn't have strength, but he had gravity, and gravity wanted the man out, just as badly as Raymond did. He dragged him through the doorway, collapsed backwards, and felt the door shift, almost shut, but he caught it again. 9:44 a.m. The man lay on the floor outside, coughing, crying, alive. Raymond looked at him, then back to the hallway. Still empty, still dark, but now not forgotten. He could feel his own heart, not racing, but slowing, the way a storm calms, not because it's over, but because it's done all it can. He looked down at his hand on the door. The skin cracked. The veins bulged. It didn't look like a hand anymore. It looked like stone. He thought, if I let go now, and no one else comes, then maybe that's okay. But if someone comes, 1 second too late, what would they see? A closed door, a missed chance, a man who gave up. At the last second, he couldn't let that be his last act, so he gritted his teeth and stood again and waited. The radio on the technician's belt outside buzzed. Collapse imminent. A voice said, everyone out, now. The man Raymond saved sat up, looked at him. You have to go, he whispered. Raymond didn't move. Please, the man begged. You'll die in there. But Raymond didn't answer. He just stared into the dark hallway and said softly, not yet. 9:51 a.m. The building trembled again. A groan, a warning, a countdown. Raymond felt it, in his knees, in the frame, in the floor, and finally, he blinked once, then looked away from the hallway and said, to no one and to everyone, if this door closes, let it be because no one else needed it anymore. And for the first time, he let go, not of duty, but of hope that someone else was still coming. And as the door slowly creaked shut, Raymond turned away to leave, but behind him, footsteps. The one who came late. South Tower, 9:52 a.m. to 9:59 a.m. Some people arrive late, but sometimes the reason you held on just one more second is because you were holding on for them. The door was almost closed. Raymond had held it open for over an hour. The flood of people had stopped. The hallway had gone quiet. The world behind him felt still, not peaceful, not calm, just done. The building groaned. The concrete above him sighed like tired lungs. And for the first time, Raymond allowed himself to let go. He took a single step away. Just one. That's all it took. To feel like he was leaving behind more than metal. He was leaving behind everything. Then came a sound. Small, muted, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Not sharp, not confident. They dragged. Heavy, slow, uneven. He froze. Turned. Through the gray mist and flickering lights, a figure emerged. Bent, exhausted, hurt. A woman, late 40s, maybe 50. Face pale, streaked with ash, and in her hands, a pink backpack, tiny, child-sized, adorned with faded unicorn stickers. She clutched it like it was the only real thing left. Raymond's chest tightened. He turned back toward the door. It was nearly closed. The pressure was fighting him now. Steel swelling from heat, hinges resisting gravity. Still, he reached out, grabbed it, and pulled one more time, because someone still needed it. The woman was struggling to walk. Every step wobbled. Her foot dragged. Raymond didn't call to her. He couldn't. His voice was gone. His throat dry and cracked from smoke. But his eyes, they begged her, "Come, please come." She stumbled, fell to one knee. He moved forward. Not fast. He couldn't anymore. But deliberate, strong, focused. He got to her, dropped beside her, pulled her arm over his shoulder. She smelled of fire and plastic and fear. Together, they moved, step by step, one foot, then the next. The door waited. He held it again, with his back, with his shoulder, with his will, and they passed through, together. As soon as they were out, the door slammed behind them, a metallic crack that echoed, like a vault, final, irrevocable, sealed. But she was through. She was alive. Raymond collapsed against the wall. The woman beside him wept, silently at first, then openly. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she whispered. "I left this as my daughter's backpack. I came back upstairs for this." She hugged the bag tighter, then turned to him. "Why were you still here?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the backpack, at the sealed door, at her face, and then he said, softly, "Maybe I was waiting for you." At 9:56 a.m., the tower shook again, deep, below, like something massive had shifted its weight. The woman struggled to her feet. Raymond helped her. Every joint in his body ached. "You have to go," he said. "But what about you?" He smiled, warm, resolved. "You've already passed me. That was the point. I stayed so someone like you could leave." She looked at him for a long second, then turned and ran. Raymond sat there. The hallway behind the door, sealed forever now, felt less like a path and more like a tomb. But he wasn't grieving. He was at peace. Inside him, he still held the faces, the prayers, the fear, the thanks. And now, the very last one, a woman who had no intention of being here, but was saved because he stayed, because he waited, because he didn't let go. Not until the last one came. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower held its breath, and Raymond, with his back against the wall, eyes closed, hands burned, heart full, was still there. When the tower breathed out, South Tower, 9:59 a.m. to 10:06 a.m. Sometimes when a building dies, it exhales one final breath. And if you're inside, you feel it, not with fear, but with a strange peace. 9:59 a.m. The South Tower held itself together, like a man who knows he's about to fall, but wants to do it with dignity. Everything around Raymond had gone still. No voices, no running, just breath, his, and the buildings. He leaned against the wall near the stairwell, back to the door, eyes closed, chest rising and falling, like the waves he used to watch as a kid. On Coney Island, late afternoons, when the tourists were gone, and the ocean sounded like memory. His hands trembled, not from fear, but fatigue. His body was almost gone, but something in his posture said, "I have done what I was meant to do." Above him, deep inside the tower, metal cracked, not loud, not sudden, more like bones, softly, surrendering. Raymond opened his eyes. Smoke drifted gently through the air, but it wasn't attacking anymore. It was drifting, like incense, at the end of a prayer. He thought of his mother, how she used to press her palm to his chest when he was a boy after his asthma attacks. She'd whisper, "You are more than your breath." And now here he was, measuring his worth by every inhale. He thought of the people who had passed him. The man with the broken wristwatch, the woman with the dog photo, the technician who gave him a coin, the girl with the pink hoodie, the mother with the backpack. All of them gone, but somehow still present. Their footsteps echoed inside his memory, as clearly as they had down the hall. He smiled, not with joy, but with stillness, a kind of inner bow, like an actor stepping back after the final line, knowing the curtain will fall, but grateful he got to say his part. Then, a vibration, not the kind that alarms, the kind that announces, "It's time." The floor shifted beneath him, not violently, just enough for his body to lean forward, ever so slightly. The wall cracked above his head. A panel popped loose. Sparks flickered like tiny fireflies. In the smoke, Raymond looked up, didn't flinch, didn't move. He just whispered, "It's okay." There was a wind, a soft pull, like the building itself was exhaling, releasing, not exploding, not fighting, just letting go. And in that moment, Raymond did too. He took one more breath, shaky, full, final, and as the floor gave way, as the world turned inward, as the ceiling bent like prayer, he didn't scream, he didn't run. He stayed exactly where he was, not because he was trapped, but because he was done. And in that surrender, he found something no fire could burn: purpose. 10:06 a.m. The South Tower collapsed. Millions watched. They saw smoke. They saw ash. They saw horror. What they didn't see was one man who had already let go, quietly, completely, not in fear, but in fulfillment. And though no one would say his name that day, and no headline would mention him, and no memorial would hold his photograph, a door had been held open for 1 hour, and behind it, a man had stood like a mountain until the mountain fell. The ones who remembered. Some lives are saved, but what follows is not always relief. Sometimes survival becomes a lifetime of memory, of silence, of one face. You can't forget. 20 years. Not every second was painful, but some memories, they weren't seconds. They were forever. The city rebuilt. The towers rose again. Streets bustled. Tourists came back. The skyline stitched itself together with steel and light. But in the hearts of those who walked away that day, something was left open. Not broken, not wounded, open. Elena Park woke every September 11th with the same dream. The smell of ash, the thudding of feet, the unbearable silence of a stairwell, and a man. No name, no uniform, no voice, just a hand, holding a door. For her, she didn't know who he was. But in that moment, he knew her. She remembered the weight of her daughter's backpack in her arms, the pink straps biting into her shoulder, the way her tears smeared down her face, the way the man looked at her as if this was the reason he had waited. Every year, she took that same backpack and cleaned it, pressed it gently, like it might still carry his touch. Daniel Monroe had been a part-time electrician then. Now he was a firefighter, captain even, but no matter how many fires he ran into, he never forgot the way he got out. He never forgot the moment he collapsed near that door, barely breathing, his eyes burning, and a man, silent and steady, grabbed his collar and pulled. No words, no badge, no hesitation. And when he turned to thank him, the man had already returned to the door, back straight, palm open. Daniel still carried a small silver coin in his gear bag. He didn't remember where it came from, only that when he looked in his pocket later that day, it was there. He rubbed it before every shift, not for luck, but to remember how courage could be quiet. Maya Flores had been 16. She was skipping a morning exam when the building shook. She never made it back to school. She never told her mother. about the test she was trying to avoid, because she knew if she hadn't been in that hallway at that exact time, she never would have seen the door, never would have passed the man. She became a poet, but she never wrote about him directly, not in public, just in her own journal. One line, written again and again every year. The man who held the door still holds me upright. Some came back, to ground zero, to the memorial pools, to the granite walls lined with names. But they knew his name wasn't there. He was never listed, never claimed, never recorded. He didn't have a floor plan, or an ID badge, or a news story. All he had was their memory, and that was enough to stay alive. Elena returned on the 20th anniversary, not for ceremony, not for speeches, just for him. She brought the same pink backpack, washed, pressed, mended. Inside, she carried only one thing, a note, laminated, typed on a typewriter she kept for special things. She stood beside the South Tower's memorial pool, hands trembling. Then she bent down, taped the note to the metal railing, and stepped back. It read, "To the man who held the door. You didn't know me, but you knew I needed one more second, and you gave it to me. You didn't ask my name. You didn't tell me yours, but your silence spoke louder than any command. I lived because you waited. I breathed because you stayed. I never saw you leave, but I've carried you every day since. People passed. Some read, some cried, some didn't understand, some understood too well. One man stood beside her, quiet, old, hat in hand. He looked at the letter, then at Elena, and simply said, I think he was waiting for me too. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to, because when someone holds a door like that, they don't just open it for escape. They open it for remembrance, for redemption, for meaning. They become the quiet between sirens, the hand you didn't know you needed, the part of your story you never told anyone, but never forgot. He was just a janitor. No photo, no medal, no grave, but in the lives of those he saved. He never closed. He never left. He never died. The man who held the door. We build statues for generals, museums for presidents, memorials for names carved in polished stone. But what do we build for the man who was never recorded, who saved lives, but never left a signature, who gave his last hour to people who never even asked for it? What do we do with the silence he left behind? 20 years later, they still didn't know his name, not officially, no birth certificate on file, no survivor report bearing his ID. He was not in the final counts, not listed among the fallen, not celebrated in speeches, but he existed because too many remembered his eyes, his hand, his door. The building fell at 10:06 a.m., but he was gone before that, not physically, but spiritually, because something about his final moment didn't feel like collapse. It felt like release, like he had fulfilled exactly what he came for. He had no uniform, no title, no command, but that day, he commanded the most important thing a man can, a boundary between death and life, a place where time paused, because he refused to move. The people who passed him never asked why he stayed. Maybe they were too afraid. Maybe they didn't want to hear the answer. Or maybe, deep down, they knew he wasn't holding the door for praise, for thanks, for recognition. He was holding it because he had lived his life in silence. And this was the first time his silence made a sound. He had always been invisible, cleaning halls no one looked at, wiping surfaces that were never thanked, picking up after people who never knew his name. But that day, every eye saw him, and not one forgot. In the years that followed, some tried to track him. Searches were launched. Tips came in. But the trail always ended the same way. A missing record, an unsigned time card, a blurry surveillance image. It was like he had existed only for that moment, as if fate had placed him in that stairwell, not by coincidence, but by design. And maybe that's what he was. Not a man, but a moment, a decision made flesh, a living yes in a world of hesitation, a promise that someone would stay behind until no one else had to. At the South Tower Memorial, his name isn't carved, but on the 20th anniversary, someone left a simple bronze plaque. It wasn't sanctioned. It was removed days later. But in that moment, it stood, and it read, "In honor of the man who held the door, you didn't wear a name tag, you didn't wear a cape, but you carried the weight of hundreds. You didn't speak, but you were heard. You didn't leave, so we could." Children now hear the story in schools, not from textbooks, but from mothers and fathers who once looked into his eyes and saw everything they needed to survive: a calm, a stillness, a truth. You matter enough for me to stay. So what we call him? A hero? A saint? An angel? He would have shrugged at all three, because to him, he was just a man doing his job. And yet, he did the one thing even the strongest men couldn't. He stayed when the world told him to run. He stood when the building begged him to fall. He opened when every mechanism around him wanted to close. They say the universe bends toward justice, that history remembers the brave, but they forget sometimes it's the quietest act that bends a timeline. One man, 1 hour, one hand on a steel frame, and because of him, thousands more took hands of their own, lived lives, held children, became something because he became nothing. He wasn't famous. He wasn't celebrated. But when the dust cleared and the names were read, there were people who bowed their heads, not for the names they heard, but for the name they never got to learn. He was just a janitor. But on that day, he was the quiet center of the loudest moment in modern history. And through the roar of sirens, the crumble of glass, the screams and the silence, his choice whispered through time: as long as someone needs me, this door stays open. Clapperboard Silent Stories. The end.